Breakout is a key to freedom, but also a curse to your life. Hello, you will be reading about the story of a dog called Jerry Moth, and he's a German Shepherd. Purebred German Shepherd to be exact. He comes from a dog cellar in the middle of nowhere, nothing but field and a one-way road. Dogs normally get taken away and never seen again, and he doesn't know what happens. Also, to finish this off, he lives with 3 other dogs. Now you might have noticed, Jerry Moth isn't telling this like Seth. You may be asking, who am I? Well, you'll never truly know. Jerry Moth woke up in his doghouse. It was cloudy outside. Not even a small bit of light broke through. Jerry Moth was also chained to his doghouse, his collar being a chain too. He stood up and walked outside and into the mud. He was in a fenced-in area. The fences were wired, and empty food and water bowls were outside. Lazily chained to the front of the doghouse. My chain was also attached to a handle on the other side of the doghouse. But unlike the dishes, the chain and handle were very sturdy. Hello. Jerry Moth heard a voice coming from another doghouse to the right of him. Soon a pit bull came out of the doghouse. She looked much bigger than Jerry Moth. Good morning, Parisa. Jerry Moth said, sitting down and looking at her. Morning. Parisa's voice sounded very young. Which is expected since Parisa is still quite young, younger than all the dogs here in fact. So, what you up to? Parisa said, her tail wagging. I just woke up. Jerry Moth replied and lied down. Oh. Soon Jerry Moth heard some claws clicking against the wood in the doghouse to the left of him. Soon a fully white Tibetan Mastiff with blue eyes slowly stepped outside. It's a small bit of its fluffy fur fell off when she had to squeeze through the doghouse exit a bit. Good morning, Parisa, and Jerry Moth. Lucia said, wagging her tail. She had a soothing motherly tone. Lucia was one of those dogs where, if she's around, you're almost always instantly calm. Morning, Parisa and Jerry Moth said at the same time. Is Donis awake? Lucia asked Jerry Moth. Jerry Moth shook his head. No, I am. A deep voice came from the doghouse in front of Jerry Moth. An Airedale Terrier Irish Wolfhound mix came out. He had a dark grey head. The dark grey color went down barely past his chest. He had a more lighter grey back and stomach. There was also a dark grey line going down his back. The dark grey line expanded and covered his rear end to his tail, but his tail tip was white. His face was a light grey color, he had dark grey circles on his eyes and his muzzle was white and a lot of fur hung down from it. And on his chest he had white fur shaping a broken heart. Donis walked out the doghouse, head low. Good morning, sweetie. Lucia said. Donis stared at Lucia for a good minute before saying anything. Morning. Donis sat down near his chain's pulling point. Is there something wrong? Parisa asked, tilting her head a small bit. Well, Donis was cut off by the sound of a door being opened. A man in protective black gear stood in the doorway. The dogs panicked and ran inside. Jeremitha's heart beat quickly. He shook in fear as he pressed up against the wood wall of his doghouse. He heard footsteps, then he saw the man standing outside his doghouse. He could only see his boots though. He heard food being dropped against metal and water being poured. He figured that he must have been refilling the food bowls, but he was still scared. The man checked the handle and walked off. He's gone? Phew. But I hope the others are okay. Soon Jerry Moth heard Lucia screaming and her fearful barking, clicks, and then complete silence. Nothing was heard but the wind. Jerry Moth and Donis looked at each other from their doghouses. Both of their eyes were full of fear and worry. Donis looked out his doghouse, then Parisa, and then finally Jerry Moth. Lucia's chain that was attached to the handle was gone, paw prints and claw marks on the ground and some blood sprinkled around. What happened to Lucia? Parisa said with fear in her voice. Donis and Jerry Moth turned around to look at Parisa. She been taken away. Jerry Moth said, looking down. Soon, one of us will be next. Donis said, sitting down. What happens if you're taken away? Parisa said. Nobody knows. Jerry Moth said. Not nobody. Donis said. They both looked at Donis. What do you mean? Jerry Moth said. Once before you guys were here and I was just alone. Donis looked down and then back at them. On the night of the full moon, when I was about to go to sleep, I saw a completely white short-haired wolf dog on top of the fence in the corner. Though the wolf dog had a lion tail. The lion tail tip was where most of its fur was, it was extremely fluffy. It stood up and trotted along the top rail of the fence, its tail waving up and down. Donis looked up at the part of the fence where he saw this lion-wolf dog. Really? Jerry Moth said, not believing a word that came out of Donis' mouth. I can't expect you to believe that. Donis said. I believe it. Parisa said, wagging her tail. That's because you're young. If you were any older you'd be on Jerry Moth's side. Donis said. Nuh-uh. Parisa said, shaking her head. Fine, believe what you want to believe. Donis said. Anyway, the wolf dog walked to the middle of the fence and sat down, its tail waving in the air left to right. She looked down at me and said. Broken-hearted one, you are welcome to ask me any question regarding this place. I had to think for a moment, then I asked what happens to dogs that get taken away. She said that they get taken away to good or bad places. One or more lucky dogs can get taken to a home, dog cafes, or something nice. While the unlucky ones can be taken to dog fighting, abusive places, or even worse. She told me that wanting to have a good life after being bought from here is just a luck game. Donis finished the story. Wow! Jerry Moth said. I know I'll get an owner that gives me a lot of belly rubs. Parisa said, her tail wagging and hitting the ground. Jerry Moth looked at Donis. Do you think Parisa will get a good life? Jerry Moth whispered to Donis. No, her breed has a bad reputation. She'll most likely be abused, falsely accused, then die or get killed by humans just for existing. Donis whispered back sadly, looking down. Though he wasn't going to cry, he had experienced this many times already. Then they both watched and played with Parisa till nightfall. Then they all went to sleep. In the middle of the night Jerry Moth was woken up by the sounds of Parisa screaming. Jerry Moth knew exactly what was happening, like Lucia. Parisa was being taken away. Jerry Moth watched Parisa crying and desperately trying to get away as she had a muzzle put on her. When the muzzle was on, she stopped making sounds. The muzzle kept her mouth from opening at all. Parisa cried and pulled on the lead as she was forcefully pulled into the building. Parisa was out of Jeremitha's view, but when he heard the door slam he knew Parisa was gone. Donis and Jerry Moth silently cried themselves to sleep over their loss. Jerry Moth woke up, he rolled over to face the doghouse exit. It was still night time. Though Jerry Moth quickly noticed that Donis was gone. Jerry Moth scrambled up, he was terrified that he could be alone. He hurried out of the doghouse and looked around. Though his neck chain felt much more looser, he twisted his head around to look at his chain. The chain wasn't attached to the handle anymore. Jerry Moth didn't question it much, just grateful that he was now free. He sniffed around for Donis' scent, his chain dragging behind him. He caught the scent of Donis and the man. He followed the scent but then hit something wooden. He looked up and saw that he hit the door. The scent only continued behind the door. Jerry Moth shook his head and huffed. I should have known that he was taken, where else would he gone? Jerry Moth thought and looked around. Never mind my foolishness, I need to find a way out of here. Jerry Moth looked around for a bit, then noticed a part of the corner fence was stained with a black color. Jerry Moth slowly walked over to the fence corner. He then also noticed that there was a large black paw print. The paw print looked very forced into the ground, as if whoever was here wanted Jerry Moth to see this. Donis? No, It couldn't be. Donis is pretty big, but this paw print is almost the size of a bear's paw. Jerry Moth stared at the paw print and hesitantly put his paw inside the paw print. Suddenly, he saw images of a black dog with blue eyes flash before his eyes. It went too fast for him to make out anything else. Then he saw Donis barking. He had blood pouring out of his mouth as he barked at something. Then Jerry Moth went back into reality. Jerry Moth jumped back. What the hell was that? Jerry Moth had fear in his voice. Soon a gush of wind blew only where the fence was stained. That part of fence shook a lot when blown it. Jerry Moth went over, avoiding the paw, and pulled at the fence. The fence was easily pulled off. I threw the fence part to the side and crawled out, careful to not get the chain stuck. I walked a bit before speeding into a run and ran out into the field, but I realized that the area was surrounded by an electric wire fence. I ran beside the electric fence, looking for a way out. I then saw a road in front of me, but I came to a halt when I saw two silhouettes of humans coming this way. I quickly looked around for a hiding spot. Oh God! Where do I hide? The dumpster? That box? Jerry Moth struggled to decide. Under the dumpster. Jerry Moth screamed in his mind as he dashed towards the dumpster and forced himself to squeeze under the dumpster. The humans walked past. Phew, that was close. Wait, why was there two humans here? Isn't this place only ran by one human? Jerry Moth shook his head. Whatever, it doesn't matter. Jerry Moth crawled out from under the dumpster and ran down the road. He ran past many transport trucks, most of them were filled up with dogs. What is going on here? This is all so strange. Jerry Moth was stopped by a familiar voices calling to him. He stopped and turned around to see Lucia, Parisa, and Donis in cages that were stacked on each other. Donis on the bottom, Parisa in the middle, and Lucia on the top. Jerry Moth, help! Parisa yelled at Jerry Moth. Help us! Lucia called Jerry Moth as she scratched at the bars. Donis wasn't calling to Jerry Moth but biting and shaking his cage's bars. Jerry Moth trotted over to the stacked cages with his friends inside. Help! Parisa screamed. Parisa, honey! Be quiet, please! You're going to attract humans. Lucia said. Donis stopped shaking the bars and Jerry Moth inspected Donis' cage lock. The cage had 4 slide locks and a key lock. Jerry Moth slid the slide locks to side and then tried to unlock the key lock with his claw. But of course it didn't work. How's it looking, Jerry Moth? Donis asked. He had fear breaking into his voice, but he tried to remain calm. Jerry Moth looked at Donis for a few seconds. I can't unlock it. Jerry Moth said, and he backed up to look at the other's cage locks. I can't unlock any of these. Jerry Moth yelled at himself. Jerry Moth, calm down, humans will hear you. Lucia was cut off by the yelling of a human. There's a loose dog on the road, yelled a human. The human grabbed a snare pole and ran towards Jerry Moth. Run, Jerry Moth! They all screamed at Jerry Moth. After a second of processing, Jerry Moth jumped to his side and ran as fast as he could. It seemed like humans were appearing from the darkness of the night to try to grab him. Jerry Moth could barely manage to dodge them in time. He even managed to get lucky enough to jump through a pole right before it closed. After what seemed like an endless road of running, he spotted a large fence, a closing fence. The path in front of Jerry Moth was being blocked by humans with nets and snare poles, and some were even loading up guns. Why do they want me so badly? Jerry Moth looked around and noticed a ladder he could climb up and then jump onto a truck, then jump truck to truck. Jerry Moth only had one chance to do with, so he couldn't mess this up. Jerry Moth dodged throw nets and bullets by a fur and leaped onto the ladder. When he jumped on the ladder, the landing impact made it start to wobble. Then it fell backwards. Jerry Moth jumped onto the truck before the ladder fell too low for him to even dare to jump. Though Jerry Moth's stomach smashed into the metal, though lucky for him, there was a metal part under him attached to help him climb up. Jerry Moth didn't bother to see what it was. Jerry Moth didn't have time to catch his breath, the gate was still closing. Jerry Moth jumped to truck, barely making most of the jumps. And each time the humans tried to make him fall and or shoot him out of the air. Jerry Moth landed on the final truck he could jump onto. Then he ran down the truck and made a break for the gates. He just managed to slip through the small crack between the gates, except his tail. Half of his tail got stuck, and the gate didn't keep closing. Must have some sort of anti-crush thing. Jerry Moth kicked at the gate and clawed at the dirt. Humans started running towards him. Jerry Moth had explored all his options to get free, except one. If he wanted to get free, he had to bite off his own tail. I have no choice, don't I? Jerry Moth took a deep breath and started biting his tail and ripping flesh from it. Blood poured down muzzle and tail and pain shot through his body. He wanted to stop so badly but he couldn't. Soon he gave a large final bite to his tail and with a sound of a bone snap he managed to rip off his tail before the humans came. Jerry Moth ran as fast as he could towards the tall grass where he'd be hidden and be almost untraceable. But when he was just so close to the freedom grass he felt something that felt like an electrical shot through his back, and soon he was in a lot of pain. More pain than his still bleeding tail gave him. He fell onto the ground, facing the fence where he saw a man holding a stun gun. The man pulled out an injector gun and filled it with a dark purple liquid, then he walked towards Jerry Moth. Jerry Moth felt the stun already wearing off. Was he trying to go easy on him? The man injected the liquid into Jerry Moth then attached something under his fur. It was scentless and felt like nothing was on Jerry Moth's skin when it was attached. Jerry Moth was in full motion now. Jerry Moth kicked the man in the stomach with his back paws, making him fall backwards. Then Jerry Moth disappeared into the tall grass. "Sir, you lost the dog," a worker called. "Or did I?" The man pulled out a tracker. This is only the start of the experiment. End of Chapter 1.